All right, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. Right now, I have 24 years clean and sober. I got about 20 years off of cigarettes. I'm going to tell you a little bit about recovery and the process that I went through. Now, basically, I want to tell you about the last day that I ever used. At that time, I was averaging about $900 in coke and speed a day, smoking over 35 joints a day. And my problem was not what I thought it was. Like, if you had suggested to me that I had a drug problem, I didn't. I had a drug solution. My life was so incredibly screwed up. I was wanted by the law in 11 counties in 2 states, mostly for stupid shit, for relating around my driver's license, but still, they were causing my life to suck. I was living in a bedroom that had trash all over the floor, yet it was in a nice apartment complex, but it was their fault that I lived that way. I hadn't had a driver's license in 17 years. So my entire theory was that I had this crappy life and getting high was the best way to make do with what I had. The other problem I had was somewhere along the line at a very early age, I somehow got the idea that the entire purpose for life was never to work and to feel good as often as possible. As young as I can remember, I was doing everything I could to get out of classes, to get out of schoolwork, to invent reasons why I couldn't do homework, to be put in special classes. I mean, literally, in the 7th grade, I was sent to a special ed class, 10 kids and 2 teachers, and I got straight A's. Because I literally had fooled everybody into thinking I was a slow learner. In 7th grade, I had fooled everybody because I didn't want to work. I did not want to do anything that made me put effort forward. And I've been doing that since I was a young kid. Even as I got into high school, I found ways to get around doing any work. And I quit high school. Not because I was getting the worst grades, not because, I had a girl pregnant or anything like that. I quit high school because I had read about something called a GED, a General Education Equivalency, I think it was called, something like that, General Education Diploma. I read about this, and I thought, wow, I don't have to go 2 more years. I was in 10th grade. I don't have to go 2.5 more years to get a high school diploma. And I knew my dad wanted me to get a diploma. My mother had left when I was 11, and my dad had raised me alone since that time. So I did some research, and this was before the internet. I had to really do research, go to the library, call people, things like that. And I found out that I could take the GED test at 16 years old. But at that time, they wouldn't actually mail me my diploma until I turned 18. But I could at least take the test. So I made a deal with my father that he would let me quit school if I took the test within the first year and passed it. And they do give you the results of your test. So again, I found the easiest way to get around the stresses and aggravations and work that high school offered me. I didn't want to go to high school. I was a kid that got picked on a lot, except when he was hanging out with the druggies. I was a kid that did not want to do any work. I just didn't want to work. It wasn't that I was stupid. I have a high IQ, and I always did. In fact, the one word that appeared on every every, what is it called, school report, grade report every semester, one word that appeared on my report cards my entire life was, Tony does not live up to his potential. Potential! I hated that word my entire life. I used to say, how the hell do they know my potential, Dad? They don't know my potential. But it was true. I didn't live up to my potential because I just wanted to do things as quick and easy as possible. I didn't want to work. I wanted to just do nothing that didn't feel absolutely good, at least for the moment. Even if it meant I would get in trouble later and feel bad, feeling good now is all that mattered. And I wasn't going to start anything that might make me work. So I did that. I quit school, took my GED, passed it, which is amazing that a kid in 10th grade passed the high school equivalency diploma test. And I hadn't even been to 11th and 12th grade because I was smart. I was intelligent. I learned quick. I just didn't want to. I didn't want anything that required me to put effort through. So when I discovered drugs, it wasn't about being cool with other people. In fact, the first time I smoked a joint was by myself. I stole a joint from an uncle, and I took it out to the woods because I didn't want anyone to say I was doing it to be cool or to fit in. I just wanted to feel good, and I heard it would make you feel good. And it took very little effort, and it did make me feel good. And then anytime somebody offered something that made me feel good quickly, whether it came in a form of a line, or a pill, or something you smoke, or something you put on your tongue, or drop in your eye, or pill form, it didn't matter. If I was promised that it would make me feel good, regardless of how long, even if I had to inhale it, then I was going to do it. Now, the truth is, I never got around to shooting heroin. But it wasn't a moral problem. I just didn't know anybody who did it, so I never got really exposed to it. But I would have. I've done tons of speed, coke, magic mushrooms, peyote buttons, all kinds of pills, black beauties, blue dexies. Yeah, I'm an old school head. I've done it all. Anything that made me feel good. Well, the first time, well, let me just get back up a little bit. The last day I ever got high, I had wrapped up a tiny little bit of cocaine. I don't think it was enough for a line. And a little bit of pot in the back of a cigarette pack, Marlboros. And it was a common thing among druggies back in the day to put it in a cigarette pack, the back of it. So that if we ever got stopped, the tobacco smell would keep the cops and the dogs away from it. So the last day I ever got high, I had lost that cigarette pack. And I was absolutely going crazy. I stripped the entire house, every cabinet, every piece of it. I couldn't find it. I was screaming. I was throwing a tantrum. Yet it wasn't like it was valuable. There wasn't enough, at least in my memory, there wasn't enough pot and coke in there. I don't think it would have been worth more than $20 in drugs, and it wouldn't have got me high more than once each. So I went out to the dumpster where I lived. I lived in a very nice, middle-class, Levittown, Pennsylvania apartment complex with huge apartment-sized dumpsters. Middle of daylight, I crawled into this dumpster and started ripping through the trash because I thought maybe my roommate or myself threw a bag of trash out with that cigarette pack in it. And I'm ripping it apart. I'm tearing it apart. I'm going through bags. I'm finding lots of cigarette packs and ripping them to shreds, and I couldn't find it. And at one point, I looked out the entrance door of the dumpster, and there was a little kid driving up on, it's a plastic tricycle. They were called big wheels in my day. But this little kid, he could have been more than 5, rolls up and sees me. And he looks up and he says, "Hey, mister. I said, "What? What you doing in the trash can?" Well, I guess you could call that a small moment of clarity. Something hit me. I'm in a dumpster. I'm covered in muck. I'm trying to find drugs that won't get me high but once. And I am absolutely stinking. And only a 5-year-old can see that something isn't right. So at that moment, I ignored the young boy and I crawled out of my trash can and I went back into the house reeking and smelling. I took a shower. My roommate had left for work. Both my roommate and I were bouncers in a local go-go bar. It was a great job for a 25-year-old guy, but it also made getting high all the time much easier. Well, we both carried weapons. We both had permits to carry guns, and there were guns all over the house. It's never a problem. We didn't have any children. We were safe and careful with them. But this time, I decided that there was something wrong with me. I was in a trash can looking for drugs. I still didn't think I had a drug problem. I thought maybe I was depressed. Maybe I just had a knife in my life sucking. Maybe the drugs weren't strong enough anymore to make it go away. But not a drug problem. So I picked up a Bulldog 44 Magnum. I loaded it with a semi-jacketed hollow point bullet. And I pointed it at my head. And I cocked it. The trigger was locked in place, and I said a little prayer. I said, "Lord," I said, "you know I'm worthless. Please help me pull this trigger. Please." Well, as I was very close to pulling the trigger, the phone rang. My friend Kenny had called. I hadn't seen Kenny in a long time. Kenny had done something called getting clean. I didn't even know what it was. I really didn't. I didn't know anybody who got clean or even wanted to. But he got clean. And he wouldn't hang out with me anymore because I used. And I was like his best friend at the time. But he stopped. He hadn't been around for a couple of months. So I said, what are you doing? He said, I owe you some money and I want to pay it back. And he did. He owed me like $25. So I said, sure, you can drop it off. I was putting the gun down when he said, look, I'll stop in, I'll drop it off, but I can't hang with you. I said, all right, whatever. So he came over and he brought me the money he owed me. And I asked him, I said, hey, Kenny, what are you doing tonight? He said, I'm going to an NA meeting. I said, N who? He said, NA. I said, what the hell is that? He told me it's for recovering drug addicts. I said, you're not a drug addict. I said, you just party a little too much. What are you talking about? He said, no, I'm a drug addict. He said, and I have to go. I can't hang with you anymore. I said, why not? He said, because they teach us to stay away from people, places, and things. I said, Kenny, I said, you're being brainwashed. I said, really, think about it. You're being brainwashed. He looked at me and he said, Tony, he said, I think my brain needs a good rinse. And he started to walk out. I said, well, hey, whoa, Kenny, what happens there at the meeting? He said, people talk and share about their new life and how they got there and, the problems they have. He said, there's also coffee and food. I said, really? Is this just a man thing? He said, no, there's women there. I said, can I go with you? He said, why? I said, well, I'm hungry. There's no food in the house. I sure didn't tell him about the gun. He knew there were guns in my house, but I didn't tell him I was pointing one at my head. I said, but yeah, I'm hungry. I wouldn't mind some cake, Danish, coffee, and pretty girls. He said, that is not a reason for going to an NA meeting. He said, but on the other side of the coin, I can't turn you down if you want to go. So come on. So we go to this meeting. As we're getting out of the car, he says, oh, I forgot to tell you something. I said, what? He said, well, people are going to try to hug you. I said, nobody's hugging me. I said, first motherfucker that hugs me, I will cold cock him right in the middle of the room. He said, yeah, okay. So I walk up the driveway of this house that was used for Cub Scout meetings. And apparently tonight it was used for an NA meeting. But I'm walking up the driveway and this huge black man, huge guy, side to side, up and down, everything about him screamed, don't mess with me. So I walked up to him, and Kenny introduced me to him, and he introduced him to me. His name was Baldwin. Baldwin reached out, took those bare arms of his, and wrapped them around my entire body and gave me a hug that almost squeezed the guts out of me. Needless to say, I didn't beat the shit out of him. I didn't hit him. I didn't fuck him up. I didn't punch him. I didn't wrestle him. I hugged back is what I did. I don't think I realized it, but I needed the hug, and I wanted the hug, but I don't think I realized it or could admit it to myself. Baldwin ended up being a good friend later on, and he was the first hug I ever got and couldn't understand it and was mad because I liked it. So we went inside, and I got coffee, and I saw pretty girls, and they had a speaker that night. And the strangest thing happened. The strangest thing. This guy told my story. He described me. He described my feelings. He described situations that I had been through. Now, don't get me wrong, I never thought that would happen. And please understand, I never thought of myself as being an addict. Addicts were junkies. Addicts were hookers. Addicts were crackheads. I wasn't like that. I had a home. I always had a job. So he continued to talk, and something hit me. I didn't give it much thought. It just hit me. I'm an addict. That's the problem. I really thought, this is insane. I'm an addict? But I realized when he told his story, it was absolutely the same as mine, that I was an addict. It wasn't a matter of just depression. It wasn't a matter of my life sucked. It wasn't a matter I couldn't get the right relationship, right job, couldn't make enough money, couldn't get a driver's license again. It wasn't a matter I didn't have a car. Nothing. All the problems I thought were being made better by getting high weren't the problems. I was the problem. I had a disease called addiction. Just like diabetes or heart disease. It was a disease. And it needed to be treated. There was no miracle. Life didn't suddenly become good. In fact, life actually sucked. But I did what they told me to do. I went to a meeting every night. They said 90 days, but I don't think I stopped for about 6 months. I didn't stop, I just didn't go every single night again. Because I knew that every time I went to a meeting, I met people who didn't think I was weird, who understood. And more than once, I heard my story told. And more than once, I got tools. Now, I'm not going to go through all the 12 steps here, but the first step was the one that made the most sense to me, that I think saved my life out of the starting gate. I was still living with a guy who used drugs, and I was still living with a bunch of guns in the house, and that had to change. But it didn't change right away. So those tools that I gained in the first step were even more expensive. I am powerless over my disease. I'm powerless. And what does that mean? Well, I discovered what that means now. I discovered what it means for me. It's not even that complicated. Like they would say, take one day at a time, one day at a time, one day at a time. In the beginning, that used to piss me off because it sounded like some kind of stupid metaphor and, like something they say in cults. And I thought, how can you take any more than one damn day at a time? What am I going to do, take a friggin' week at a time? Like, it's really stupid. And I thought these people just walked around reiterating these different cliches. But then I learned something. I learned that in life, no matter how bad something sucks, whether it's a diet, whether it's a medicine, whether it's a treatment, whether it's a book, a job, no matter how bad you think something stinks and you hate it, almost anybody can probably do it for one day. That's it. All I had to do was make a decision to stay clean for that day. I never wanted to use the word quit, and so I was told not to. I'm not quitting. I'm just going to stop for today. And I'm going to use every tool I need to get through today. Every tool that they've given me. Not just tools that are in the brochures and the pamphlets and the books, but tools that people gave to me in the rooms. Because people had one thing there that most psychologists and psychiatrists I talked to in my life didn't have. They had experience. They had experience with using, they had experience with wanting to die, and they had experience with getting clean, and they had experience with staying clean, and they had experience with learning not to hate life, that it didn't completely suck, and that you could stay clean and eventually be okay and comfortable with it. But it doesn't happen after 5 days clean. It doesn't happen after 10 days clean. And I'm telling you what, people that I met that came to meetings and all they could think about was, they can't do this forever. They can't do this forever. Well, they mostly relapsed because they ignored the first step and the first lesson, which was one day at a time, and I'm powerless. They would talk about, I can't do this forever and I can't quit. Well, when I finally accepted the fact that I didn't have to quit, that recovery is not a process of quitting. Too many people who've never been through it use that word quit. It's a process of one single day. That's all it is. It's one day. You just have to stop and not make a decision to pick up a drug for one day. Okay? Now, talk about the powerlessness. One of the lessons I learned from another addict was to go up to my stove and turn on the stove, turn the flame on, and put my hand in it. And I remember looking at my friend and saying, "You're out of your mind. I'm not putting my hand in the fire." He said, "Why not? Go ahead, put your hand in it." I said, "No, I'll get burned." "No, you can hold it in there for about 3-4 seconds and you'll be okay." "No. Yeah, in fact, if you hold it in there for 3-4 seconds, it'll actually feel really good before it starts to burn." I said, "No, I'll get burned." He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "Yeah, I'm positive. I will get burned." I said, He said, "How do you know that? Have you ever stuck your hand in there?" I said, I've been burned before in my life. I know what hot does. Hot flames burn." Yeah. Well, he said, "That's the definition of powerless." I said, "What?" He said, "You completely accept the fact that you cannot put your hand in fire without getting burned. You can't do it. You don't question whether you can do it. You don't think, this time I'll be able to do it. You have accepted the fact that you cannot put your hand in fire without getting burned. Well, being powerless over a disease is the same thing. Okay? First, you have to accept and believe that this is a disease. Addiction is a disease. Recovery is the treatment. You have to accept this. And accepting it this is scientific. It's not spiritual. Even the Surgeon General has determined that addiction is an illness. You can't help that you have this illness. You can't help when you catch a cold. You can't help when you get cancer. You can't help these things. You got them. You have the disease of addiction. Now, powerless means that any time you touch the fire, you're going to get burned. No matter how long you touch it for, no matter what you use to touch it, you're going to get burned. And he taught me that addiction is the same way. I have to accept that I just happen to be a person. And maybe there are those who don't, but I am one of them. I am a person who has this disease that causes me damage every time I use a mood or mind-altering substance. Every time. I may use it 3 or 4 times and nothing happens, but eventually that substance will drive me to disparity and depression and hopelessness and sadness. And usually it only has 3 endings: jails, institutions, or death. Most of us don't know 80-year-old junkies, 80-year-old druggies. I'm sure somebody's out there saying, oh, I know grandmothers. Yeah, there are exceptions, but they're not a lot. The final result for this lifestyle is usually jails, institutions, and death for the addict. Yeah, I believe there are people who aren't addicts. I had a friend who got high and did drugs, but he kept his career. They never came first. And the economy was bad. He didn't have a job. He didn't do them. But I wasn't like that. I used to do my budget for the week, and I would write down electric, pot, speed, phone bill, rent, and that's how I wrote it down. And I would talk to the landlord and make all kinds of excuses why I needed an extra week for the rent, yet I had a bag of dope that week. So really, that's it in a nutshell. One day at a time simply means that I'm not quitting. That all I'm doing is making a commitment to myself not to get high today. In fact, somebody once told me that I can even promise myself that I can get high tomorrow. But I can't get high today. But tomorrow I have to make myself the same promise. And it's not much more complicated than that. One day at a time. I only have to do something I don't like for one day. But there's a gift to this. If you keep making that promise to yourself one day at a time, well, eventually you're going to be doing it without making the promise. That not picking up a drug on a daily basis is just going to be part of who you are. It will happen. It'll happen for you. Now, there are certain things in recovery you really have to do. You have to plug into a support group of other people. You got to call people you don't know and ask for help. You got to absorb yourself in the program. Whatever program you're in, you have to absorb yourself. It's not a once-in-a-month thing. It's an everyday thing for as long as you can do it. I get mad when people tell me, oh, I tried this, I tried that, it didn't work. I guarantee if I talk to you for 10 minutes, I'll find that you only tried part of it. Like, you went to meetings, but you didn't call anybody. Or you hung out with people, but you didn't go to very many meetings. Or you used every couple of days. Now, see, there it is in a nutshell. Don't pick up under any and all circumstances. But you don't have to do that the rest of your life. Stop putting that in your head. Stop making forever an obstacle. Forever doesn't have to be an obstacle. I learned that I only have to do it for one day. And even today, after 24 years clean, there are days where I still tell myself, you know what, I just got to get through the day and I'm clean. That's it. Now, I'm going to fast forward. I've spoken at lots of meetings. I've spoken at conventions. I've had good times and bad times. I've been to 13 funerals. A lot of people who relapsed and died. I've also been to funerals of people that had 8, 10, 15 years and relapsed and died. So it does happen. There can never be a day when I just tell myself I'm doing better, so I don't need recovery anymore. Because it's kind of like the problem that people have with antidepressants. They stop taking them because they feel better, not realizing it's taking them that's making them feel better. Same thing with recovery. One day when people decide, I've been clean 10, 12 years, I'm not an addict. I'm just somebody that used to use drugs. Well, that's usually when they end up dead because we are addicts. Okay, and when I accepted that, and I accepted that I was powerless over that, that's what gave me a chance to change my life. Now, some people move on to careers and relationships and marriages and children. I've seen all kinds of wonderful things happen to people that get clean and stay clean one day at a time. I had a lot of that. I had a good career in appraisal management. I had some wonderful relationships. Yeah, that's another thing. People say, don't get in a relationship for the first year. I didn't get into one the first 3 years. Not really because I didn't want to, pretty much because I was still pretty sick and kooky. I drove women crazy. But today I've been with the same woman now 14 years. It's a good thing. But here it is 14 years later. And I'm going to tell you something about myself. I have 2 diseases which cause a tremendous amount of pain. I have fibromyalgia, which causes all my joints to hurt and my muscles. And I have stage 4 metastasized prostate cancer. The cancer has a Gleason score of 9, which measures its aggressiveness on a scale of 1 to 10, which means it's very aggressive. And metastasized means it spread to my bones. My father, my grandfather, and my father's brother all died of the same cancer. I pretty much knew I'd get it one day. And there are those, including me a long time ago, that thought, if you got a disease like that, why wouldn't you get high again? What's the difference? You're eventually going to die of it anyway. I'm still clean. And although I take what drugs are prescribed to me, I'm still careful with those because I have to remember I am an addict. And my body, as an addict, does not know the difference between recreational and medicinal. All it knows is got a problem, take a pill, even after 24 years. So even if for 24 years I accept one day at a time that I'm powerless over that disease, it did not go anywhere because I'm still clean. It didn't. It's still with me. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but I only have to deal with it for one day. Even with 24 years clean and sober, I only have to deal with the disease for one day. And what can I do today to deal with my disease? Well, one is accept it. I still have it. Number 2 is accept that I can't fight it. 24 years does not make me powerful over my disease all of a sudden. It didn't make it so that I can use and then just get clean again. Because I've been to those funerals. So, my wife holds all my drugs. All my prescriptions. She holds them all. And it's not that I have an urge to take any of them for fun or overdose on them or kill myself. I don't have an urge at all. However, you never know when something's going to hit the fan in your life. When someone you love is going to die, when someone you love is going to get sick, or when you're going to have cancer. Stage 4. So I still have to live my life with the knowledge and acceptance that I have a disease of addiction on top of my other diseases. And that affects every area of my life. I mean, anything that makes me feel good quickly, I am prone to overdoing. Okay, anything. Although it's an expensive hobby and I can't afford it anymore because I'm not working, I love to play golf. And I have an old set of clubs in here. I love to play it. But if I could afford to play it whenever I wanted to, I would start spending money that I couldn't afford on accessories and clubs and country club members. I would start blowing money left and right. I would start, when I worked, I would call out of work to go play golf because it's something that made me feel good. Yeah, golf, a harmless game. Racetrack, casinos. I hate it when they open them up nearby because the only time I can go to any one of them, and I don't go anymore because I'm so broke, I have no income anymore. But the only time I could go was when I was with my wife because she would grab me and take me out of there. Like she'd say, "Okay, you got a half hour, and that's it." Because the times I went alone, my disease came out, and I spent way too much. So I really don't go anymore at all because I've really realized that that's part of my addiction, and I am completely powerless over it. Um, so pretty much that's all I'm going to talk about today. Just remember, don't get over complex with the whole idea of one day at a time, just for today, powerless. Keep it simple. One day at a time is very simple. Just stay clean today. That's all I ever had to do. And even with 24 years clean and sober, I only promised to stay clean today. That's it. I guarantee you, after you string together a bunch of promised days, the urge to use will go away. One more thing I would like to mention. They tell you to stay away from people, places, and things. That means ditch your play friends, play places, and play things. It's very simple. The people I notice that don't eventually get rid of all that don't eventually stay clean. They end up using. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, if you go into a barber shop every day, eventually you're going to get a haircut. But here it is 24 years later. I've got a wife that I love dearly. And even with a horrible, horrible disease that's taken my ability to earn income, I had to GoFundMe because we can't pay the bills. Um, I had to get food stamps for the first time in my life. I didn't even do that when I was actively using. I'm in pain every day, but I don't pick up. I don't get high. If I die today, I die clean and sober. I die knowing that I helped a lot of people get clean and stay clean. I die knowing that I did everything I could for one day. And that's all I ever had to do to begin with. After all, we did the same thing when we were using, most of us. I ran around and tried to get dope to get high today. Not tomorrow. I wanted it now. Well, that's the same thing I do at recovery. And I just have to remember, one day at a time, that if I stick my hand in fire, I'm going to get burned. And there's no trick that's going to let me do it without getting burned. My name is Tony. Here's to staying clean for a day. Thank you.